This is right, Arab.
Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from London. Excellent to have you with us. I'm Ollie Barrett, and in this bulletin we'll bring you updates on stories developing all around the world. In Canada, more unmarked graves have been discovered at an Indigenous school. The total number found countrywide is now over 1,000. Anger is mounting over the mushrooming abuse scandal in the country, and the chorus for a papal apology is also growing. We will get you more details on that story, but first let's take a look at our top headlines. Estonia is the first European country to recognise both the Indian Covishield and Covaxin jabs for entry. Other EU member states such as Germany, Spain and Ireland currently only recognise Covishield. President Xi Jinping says the era of China being bullied is gone forever as he leads celebrations to mark 100 years of the Chinese Communist Party. Tensions, though, in Hong Kong as China celebrates that anniversary. The financial hub today marks its 24th anniversary of Chinese sovereignty. South Africa's top court clears President Cyril Ramaphosa of allegations from the country's corruption watchdog that he misled Parliament over money donated for his campaign. Multiple cities in the US and Canada break all-time temperature records as a historic and deadly heatwave sweeps the western part of the North American continent. Actor and comedian Bill Cosby is released from prison after the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania overturned his sexual assault conviction. And Lionel Messi's 21-year association with Barcelona has officially come to an end, for now at least. The six-time World Footballer of the Year is a free agent after his contract expired on Wednesday. Talks over a new deal are ongoing. Another 182 unmarked graves have been discovered near a former boarding school for Indigenous children in Canada. Over 1,000 unmarked graves have now been found in the country. Anger among the Indigenous community in Canada is mounting. 2 more Catholic churches have been set ablaze, taking the total to 8. The Canadian Prime Minister's denounced the vandalism and arson.
As the Indigenous communities in Canada struggle to deal with an unthinkable loss, another 182 unmarked graves were discovered at a former Indigenous school in Canada. The discovery of graves have reopened wounds for Canada's Indigenous community. The latest discovery has been at a third former Indigenous residential school. The remains are to be believed of students aged 7 to 15 at the former St. Eugene's Mission School near Cranbrook in British Columbia. These schools were operated by the Catholic Church on behalf of the federal government from 1912 to until early 1970s. Between 1800s and the 1990s, more than 150,000 indigenous children were forced to attend residential schools. A settlement deal with the government recognized 139 such institutions which aimed to assimilate children into the Canadian mainstream against their will. Earlier, remains of 215 children in unmarked graves were discovered at the former Kamloops Indian Residential School in British Columbia. 751 more unmarked graves were discovered at another school in Marieville last week. In June, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said that these horrific discoveries have forced Canadians to reflect on the injustices that Indigenous people have faced.
What we know is that the discovery in Kamloops is part of a larger tragedy, and that from coast to coast to coast, many children forced into the residential school system disappeared without a trace. We know that the harm caused by the legacy of these institutions plays out today in the intergenerational trauma so many families must deal with. And we know that Indigenous peoples still face racism, systemic discrimination, and unacceptable injustices.
Trudeau has also asked the Pope to come to Canada to apologize for the Catholic Church's role running residential schools for Indigenous children.
I have spoken personally, directly, with His Holiness Pope Francis to impress upon him how important it is, not just that he makes an apology, but that he makes an apology to Indigenous Canadians on Canadian soil. I know that the Catholic Church leadership is looking and very actively engaged in what next steps can be taken.
Anger among people is mounting over the mushrooming abuse scandal. Amid growing calls for a papal apology, two Catholic churches in Canada, Northmeal Church in Alberta and St. Catherine Tequitha Church in Nova Scotia was set ablaze. In recent days, 8 churches across Canada have been destroyed or damaged by suspicious fires, most of them in Indigenous communities. Last week, a statue of Pope John Paul II was defaced outside an Edmonton church. Red paint was smeared across the base of the statue. Canadian police has launched an investigation into all incidents. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau urged people to participate in reconciliation while denouncing vandalism and arson. The flag atop Parliament has been lowered to commemorate the student's death and will remain at half-mast for the 1st of July, Canada's National Day. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Next today, sources tell WION that at least 7 European Union nations have included the Made in India Covishield vaccine in their Green Pass. These nations are Germany, Austria, Slovenia, Greece, Ireland, Estonia and Spain. Estonia has approved both India's Covishield and Covaxin shots. Outside of the bloc, Switzerland and Iceland have approved Covishield vaccine for travel as well. Earlier, toughening its stance on European Union COVID certificates, India had asked the EU to accept Covishield or Covaxin, or it won't accept the bloc's digital Green Pass, which would mean that people from the European Union could have to undergo a mandatory quarantine upon arrival in India, even if they had been vaccinated. However, isolation for those carrying the EU's digital pass will not be required if Brussels does accept India's Covaxin and Covishield vaccines. The bloc has listed only those vaccines which have been approved by the European Medicines Agency. The vaccine certificate is being rolled out today. Vaccines approved by the EMA are Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca and Janssen. But Covishield, which is the AstraZeneca version being manufactured in India, is yet to get clearance. The exclusion of vaccines being administered in India has sparked concerns that Indians will face difficulties in travelling to the European Union's 27 member states. According to a diplomatic document accessed by news agencies, the United States has asked European countries to delay a proposed digital services tax. According to the US document, it threatens the work being undertaken via the OECD and G20 process. Referring to the European institutions that will carry through the European Union's plan, the document adds, and I quote, "We urge you to work with the European Council and the European Commission to delay its release. Its timing," it goes on, "would risk entirely derailing the negotiations at a sensitive juncture." In a strongly argued letter, Washington presented its diplomatic outreach to a handful of EU capitals ahead of the levy by the European Commission on July 14. Negotiations are underway to strike an important preliminary deal on global taxation. The talks currently underway at the OECD in Paris involve 139 countries. This is ahead of G20 finance ministers meeting in Venice on July the 9th. Talks would then continue with hopes for a final deal later in the year. The request by the US has been delivered to ministries in several EU countries, including Germany, the Netherlands, and some Nordic countries as well. Nations are now negotiating a US-backed global minimum corporate tax of at least 15%. This is along with a second provision that would allow nations to tax a share of the profits of the world's most profitable companies. The US request comes just weeks after US President Joe Biden and EU chiefs held a reset of relations after difficult years during the Trump presidency.
To welcome you in Brussels.
With increasing reports of online financial fraud, Google is planning to tighten measures on its platform here in the UK. Google says that all financial services will need to be verified by the regulator before they can advertise.
Google is to clamp down on fraud on its platforms, at least in the UK. The search giant said all financial services will need to be verified by the country's regulator before they can advertise. Last year, Britain's financial watchdog issued 1,200 warnings about scams promoted on social media platforms by fake companies. That was double the number in 2019. Google said in a blog post that it would start enforcing the new policy from early September. The Financial Conduct Authority welcomed the move, but said it wasn't enough. It says a permanent and consistent solution will require legislation. The FCA now says it will assess the outcome of Google's move once the changes take effect. Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey is reportedly pressing to make it a legal requirement that internet giants take down financial fraud websites.
The threat of a so-called sausage war between the UK and the European Union has been averted for now. Both sides have agreed to delay the need for checks on chilled meat that is shipped to Northern Ireland from Britain. But the truce will only last for 3 months. UK Brexit Minister David Frost has called it a sensible extension to the previous grace period. He's also called for a permanent solution for post-Brexit trade to the province. European Commission Vice President Maros Sefcovic warned that the Commission has not issued a blank cheque. The extension will allow stakeholders and especially supermarkets in Northern Ireland to continue to adapt to the supply chains to the post-Brexit situation.
We are accommodating the UK's request to extend the grace period for the movement of chilled meats from Great Britain to Northern Ireland by an additional 3 months until 30th of September of this year. However, we are not issuing a blank cheque. This solution is of temporary nature in which strong conditions are attached, meaning that the UK must fulfil clear obligations
London had angered Brussels by threatening to unilaterally extend the grace period for implementing the checks. That move had sparked threats of reprisals from the EU, including targeted tariffs. But tensions cooled after the UK government submitted a formal request for an extension. After the UK left the European Single Market and Customs Union on January the 1st, Northern Ireland's trading arrangements have caused some disruption. The province is separated from the British mainland by the Irish Sea, and it has the UK's only land border with an EU country, the Republic of Ireland. EU officials have been anxious to ensure that goods crossing into Northern Ireland from Britain meet the bloc's standards and customs requirements. Brussels insists the UK agreed to the Northern Ireland Protocol contained in the Brexit deal and must stick to it. London says the EU is interpreting that protocol in a purist way that is causing unnecessary disruption to trade. To China now, and President Xi Jinping has called for the comprehensive implementation of the Chinese governance of Hong Kong. That as the Chinese Communist Party celebrates its 100th founding anniversary. Hong Kong is also marking 24 years since its handover. President Xi Jinping hailed the country's development, saying the era of China being bullied and slaughtered is gone forever. He said that China being humiliated by global powers was a thing of the past. He insisted that China has never oppressed anyone. And President Xi said the principles of one country, two systems should be implemented.
The Chinese people will never allow any foreign forces to bully, oppress or enslave us. Whoever wants to do so will surely face bloodshed in front of a great wall of steel built by more than 1.4 billion Chinese people. We must fully and accurately implement the principles of one country, two systems, Hong Kong people administering Hong Kong, Macau people administering Macau, and a high degree of autonomy. Implement the central government's comprehensive governance over Hong Kong and Macau special administrative regions. We must adhere to the legal system of the special administrative regions to safeguard national security.
While Xi Jinping hails China's rise to a global power from an oppressed colony, its control over Hong Kong has intensified. These are pictures from Hong Kong's Victoria Park. Police have cordoned off the park to stop people from gathering there to mark the city's handover anniversary. The use of the controversial national security law in Hong Kong is also intensifying. Several anti-government protesters have been charged with sedition under the law, and security's been beefed up in the city to stop people from marking their handover.
We found that in Hong Kong, national security is frequently being used as a pretext to curb voices of opposition, and the national security law itself has given the Hong Kong authorities very powerful tools by which they can curb freedom of expression and other human rights.
Hong Kong activist Granda Wong was taken away by police today after she waved a Union Jack at a causeway point. The activist was also detained for 14 months after she participated in multiple 2019 protests in Hong Kong. WION correspondent Patrick Fock sent us this report highlighting the contrast between scenes in Beijing and Hong Kong.
Well, as we know, the loss of Hong Kong, it was seen as a great humiliation to the Chinese people. So it's not necessarily something they want to celebrate, and certainly don't want it to overshadow this other important milestone in its history. But, you know, if you think back to a couple of years ago, when China was also marking the 70th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China, you know, we had hugely contrasting scenes where we had, you know, obviously a big parade taking place in Hong Kong, and there were heavy protests taking place in Hong Kong. You know, these are the sorts of scenes that Beijing does not want to see and does not want to see a repeat of as well. And today the focus was very much on Beijing, and of course, you know, as Xi Jinping said, of the achievements of the Communist Party, and also this focus on the success, as he put it, of the Marxist system with Chinese characteristics, which Hong Kong really hasn't been part of until after 97, one might argue.
2 days after the Ethiopian government declared a unilateral ceasefire, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has downplayed his army's pullout from the war-hit capital, Mekelle. He says the reason the army withdrew was because Mekelle was no longer the centre of the conflict. The statement came amid reports of rebels taking over the regional capital.
Ethiopia's army has pulled out of Tigray's capital Mekelle because the place is no longer the centre of gravity, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has said, contradicting statements from Tigrayan forces that Ethiopian troops are on the run.
It was a center of a government, a center for known and unknown resources, but by the time we exit, there's nothing special about it except that there are some 80,000 people, and those people who loot. Otherwise, there's nothing that makes it different from Abiy Adi or Shiraro or Bashasha. It's lost its center of gravity in the current context.
Abiy's statement, posted online on Wednesday, comes after the Ethiopian government declared a unilateral ceasefire on Monday. That was amid reports that downtown Mekelle had been reached by forces loyal to the Tigray People's Liberation Front, the ethnically based party that dominated Ethiopian politics for nearly 3 decades. Footage also emerged of celebrations in the town of Shire after Eritrean troops allied to the federal forces had reportedly left. An Ethiopian government spokesman said Eritreans had withdrawn from the region. Eritrea's information minister did not immediately respond to requests for comment. Thousands of people have been killed and 2 million displaced since the conflict broke out in November. The United Nations has said at least 350,000 people are facing famine and 5 million others need immediate food aid, in the worst global food crisis in a decade. The Ethiopian government spokesman, Redwan Hussein, also said that the ceasefire was a political decision for a humanitarian cause. Hussein warned that, if required, federal soldiers could return to Mekelle in less than 3 weeks. But TPLF spokesman Getachew Reda claimed the federal troops were forced out and called Abiy's statement a lie. "We bested them in their own game," he said via satellite phone. They lost.
The Israeli government has reached a deal with Jewish settlers over an outpost in Israel-occupied West Bank. It became a flashpoint for clashes between Palestinians and Israeli forces. As per the agreement with Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, the Jewish settlers will leave the Givat Eviatar outpost.
Jewish settlers have agreed to quit a remote outpost that has become a flashpoint for clashes with Palestinians who also claim the land. They'll quit Givat Eviatar in the Israeli-occupied West Bank under an agreement with Israel's new government. But it looks likely that at least some of its buildings will remain, locked and under military guard, an outcome sure to anger Palestinians who want it removed. They've waged night disruption protests over the last few weeks, burning flaming torches and tyres to send acrid smoke and a message into settler homes. Palestinian officials said Israeli soldiers have shot dead 5 Palestinians during stone-throwing protests since the outpost was set up. The settlement near the Palestinian city of Nablus grew rapidly. It was set up without permits in May and was soon home to more than 50 families. Israel's military ordered it to be cleared, presenting an early challenge to Israel's new Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, who heads a pro-settler party. Settler leader Yossi Dagan said the families would leave voluntarily under the deal.
It's not a simple plan. We made the decision with a heavy heart. On the one hand, with great sorrow about the things that weren't easy, and on the other hand, with understanding that it will benefit and strengthen settlement activity in the land of Israel, and also the unity of the people, especially in the difficult period we are in today.
The residents of Beta, a nearby Palestinian village, claim ownership of the land. The deputy mayor says protests will continue until it's returned to them. Most world powers deem the settlements, built on land Israel captured and occupied in a 1967 war, to be illegal. Israel disputes this, citing historical ties to the land and its own security needs.
And a prototype of a flying car has successfully completed its first intercity flight between two Slovak airports. Aircar is a road vehicle that can transform itself into a plane within minutes. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned to WION World is One.
One World Trade Center, that is the one where the impact.
The cause of India's freedom for many years.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr.
America is a constant work in progress.
From our studios live in New York City, I'm Susan Tehrani.
People from many different countries, some who have been in America for generations, others who are more newly arrived.
So what Joe Biden has tried to do is definitely try to frame the election as a referendum.
The US president even called President Erdogan an autocrat.
Hello, I'm Jodie Cohen, broadcasting from Jerusalem.
Israel might be on the verge of getting a new government.
Climate change will, for the